All right, good morning, class. I thought we'd give a little brief lecture on the two short pieces of fiction that you were supposed to read for week one. I'm Patrick Wilson, by the way. I will be your English 1102 instructor for this semester. I hope the first 3 days have been going well for everybody. It looks like everybody's been logging in. There's still several students that probably need to log in. I double check that here before we leave, I guess. The deal about the whole login, the college has a policy. If you've been reading and checking my emails the last few days, the whole reason why there's something new Sunday is more or less verification and attendance policy. So you need to finish that quiz by 11:59 this Sunday. Otherwise, if you don't submit something to be graded, no matter how many times you logged in, how many times you read the material, but you didn't finish the quiz, come Monday morning, you're going to be counted as a no-show. And that will start the process of you getting dropped from the course starting next week. Which will mean you wouldn't be able to take the course, won't be able to log in. It's a similar policy for any of the other online courses that you may be taking. They should have something that you need to turn in within the first 5 or 7 days for a grade. If you don't do that, you will be no-showed and withdrawn from those courses as well. There is a restatement deal that you can try to do. It may be a little bit more because it's the second week of college. Basically, you probably will have to pay some money to possibly get back in. And then you have the whole deal of the catch up. Because if you try to reinstate toward the end of next week, well, you just missed week 2. And there's going to be something due that Sunday as well. So, again, late work, I really can't do too much with the late work. Because this is a fast-paced nature course. Something is usually going to be due by Sunday, 11:59 each week. If you looked at the checklist, there's probably maybe only 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks out of the whole, 16 weeks that we don't have something due on a Sunday. So hopefully everybody's able to log in, have read the syllabus, has looked at the checklist to see what you need to read for each week, see what's due for each week, know where your textbook is because you have an OER, which is an open educational resource. Basically what that means, it's a free textbook. The page numbers that you see in the syllabus or in the checklist relate to the e-text. If there's no page numbers by a text, I usually provide that for you as a handout or an upload in your weekly folder. Basically every Thursday, the new week's folder, like week 2, will open up. So if you feel confident and comfortable about working ahead, you can. You don't necessarily have to, because really week 2 will start Sunday at midnight. The deal about the weekly folders is that, like the week 1 folder, if you need to download or take anything away from that for note-wise, just to kind of keep in another personal folder or something of yours, you need to do that before Sunday midnight as well, because every Sunday at midnight, the old folder disappears to give room for the new week's folder. Sometimes the new folder may not have everything in it, so I may be adding stuff to it as we go along. But by Monday of the new week, everything should be there. So it's very important to check your email regularly, your Coastal Pines student email, because that's where you're going to be getting email from your instructors, and to regularly check the weekly folders in case something new is there. All right, so let's look a little bit about Catherine Mansfield. As you can tell right here, she was born in 1888. She died in January of 1923, born in October. She was raised in the colonial New Zealand, moved to the UK, was a prominent modernist writer, and became friends with other writers such as D.H. Lawrence, which you might have heard of, other short stories and novels, as well as Virginia Woolf. Historical context as it relates to the short story. Miss Brill was published in the 1920s and is set in post-World War I in France. Some character summaries, because if you looked at some of the videos that I uploaded to your weekly folders, it gives you some literary terms, literary devices to kind of keep in mind, especially as you read some of these short stories and short fiction, because it gives you the lingo that literary critics use and that you could use when you're doing your discussion post, when you're starting that first essay, and we talk a little bit more about that here. If not during this particular video, definitely next week we'll get a little bit more involved in that first essay, which is not due for a while, and a lot of reasons why I'll go ahead and give you that first paper topic is because we're in the process of still reading some of these works, so you may not necessarily have a topic narrowed down until you've read maybe 4 or 5 of these short pieces of fiction. You can go ahead and obviously, if you like any of the 2 stories that we've read this week, you can choose one of the topics that relate to that and go ahead and start brainstorming and rough drafting and that stuff and that type of stuff if you like, or you can kind of wait till next week after you read the next 2 stories. I would say, because it's going to be due during the week that you have your first exam, which will be based on fiction. We will talk a little bit more about what exam 1 is going to cover in the weeks to come. So I will, really by the time, I would say, to give you enough time, probably by week 3, you really should have a paper topic chosen for the first paper, just to give you enough time to, brainstorm, send me rough drafts, write the darn thing, use smart thinking if you need to. So you want to give yourself enough time. Again, with online courses, you need to organize your time, and you need to have very good time management, because before you know it, week 5 will be here. That's pretty much about the middle of September. So you do have a little bit of time, but I wouldn't wait until the week that it's due to start writing, especially if you got a test that you have over all the fiction that we're reading for the last, 5 weeks, basically Sundays apart. So one Sunday you're going to have the test. The other Sunday is going to be when the paper is going to be due, or vice versa. You have to check the checklist just to make sure of that. Some of the characters, right? Protagonist. Protagonist is like the main character. A lot of folks like to use the word protagonist as the good guy. Sometimes that's the case, but really the protagonist is the main character, or the central character that piece of fiction is focusing on. So in this case, Miss Brill is the protagonist in the story, because it focuses on her and her weekly routine of going to the park, right, every Sunday or whatever the case may be. Antagonists, a lot of times folks look at antagonists as being the bad guy. That's not necessarily always the truth. It's usually, when we look at antagonists in this particular short fiction by Mansfield, the young couple in love are the antagonists. Why? Well, because they bring her back out of her own little world, and her own little world being Miss Brill here, and cause the conflict of the story. You may have some minor characters in short fiction, and that's basically everyone else at the park, such as the old couple on the bench, the young women and the soldiers, as well as the little kids running around. So keep those terms in mind: minor characters, antagonist, protagonist. Some plot summary, right? What's really going on in the story, to sort of get us really thinking about it, maybe in a deeper notion, deeper way. So we see at the beginning, Miss Brill is introducing her fur and describing the park that she attends. We also see that the young couple sits down on the beach beside her, which this sort of goes from exposition to the rising action, where we see the young lady refusing to kiss her lover because of Miss Brill. The climax, again, is the, sort of the turning point of the particular piece of fiction. Miss Brill overhears the young couple talk about wanting her to leave and the ugly fur she wears, right? Which is a little kind of disrespectful, especially with Miss Brill of her age. Some things, you've heard the old saying, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Just sort of keep it in your head and sort of move on. The young couple, because they're young and probably immature, don't really follow that philosophy, or maybe never was taught it by their own parents. And that's why we get sort of that climax here. The falling action is Miss Brill is running back to her cover board because of what was said about her. So she's embarrassed, she's sad. Remember, it's just her. She doesn't really have any other family or friends in the picture. So, I mean, you've probably been in situations where you walk past a table or walk somewhere in public, Walmart or something, and you might have overheard somebody say something nasty or ugly, maybe directly toward you, to somebody that you know, or just in passing. So you gotta have to try to, be empathetic and put yourself in Miss Brill's shoes during this time, because it doesn't make anybody feel too pleasant or too happy if somebody is really talking disrespectful or nasty toward you. I mean, we've all been in that situation where we've been probably in her shoes, and we've all probably been the young couple that's actually been the one that sort of instigated the whole deal. So there's really two sides of that coin. Being on the receiving end on it is never a fun feeling. Being the one directing it sometimes makes us feel like we have power over the person, that we have a little bit of control. But in the end, I mean, it's really not a good thing. And usually karma comes back to bite us in the rear end. So, I mean, that's why you want to always kind of try to treat folks with respect. We don't know what their situation is at the time, what they're going into. We're only human. Humans will talk, as you know, gossip, that type of stuff. But things do have a way of coming back and biting you in the butt sometimes when you least expect it or don't want it. So they could be the ones instigating it now toward Miss Brill, but 5 years down the road, another younger couple, because now if they're still together and they're older, somebody, a younger couple may come up and make fun of them, and they probably won't necessarily remember what they did to Miss Brill, but getting made fun of or picked at, it's not a good feeling. So especially, going through middle school and high school. I know there's some dual enrollment students. You might be able to relate a little bit with Miss Brill here, more on that level, as somebody picking and prodding and wanting to push your buttons. Again, as you get older as adults can be nasty to people too, as we know. People have, especially out and about. If you're hot and bothered about traffic or something, you can kind of get in a road rage incident, and things can really, words can be said. Usually that's usually the most of it, but you just never know how far that's going to transpire. The resolution, as it gets closer to our ending here, Miss Brill puts the fur back into the box, and she does this. She thinks she can hear it crying. So in some ways, because she wears the fur, she loves the fur. The fur is an inanimate object, but for her, it symbolizes a lot of things, and we will dig into some of that symbolism. But she thinks it's the reason why folks are sort of distant, coming distant toward her or making fun of her. So she's like, well, let me change the one thing that I can control, and that's putting the fur back. But she's having some doubts about doing that, because when that's something that she enjoys wearing, and when you put it away, it's sort of like something that's possibly, it's a piece of her that's dying in a lot of ways. If we look at some of the themes, the theme in the story, in the short story Miss Brill, is how loneliness and sense of rejection can cause an individual to be unable to differentiate perception and reality. Sorry. Need to get this coffee in me. But yeah, you do have this sense of loneliness. We see that as Miss Brill goes through the park every Sunday, and she does get this sense of rejection from those around them, from the young couple, from the soldiers, the young kids. It just seems like she is in her own little world. But she does have that, that social aspect of it. Seems there's a lot of rejection there between her and people around her, or between her and her society or her world, that she is trying to fit in as much as she can. Continue a theme. This is made very clear in a way that Miss Brill views and perceives the world in a rather positive and play-like way. At the beginning of the story, we see Miss Brill taking out a fur and rubbing the life back into the dim little eyes of the animal. So it's like the animal is dead, right? It's a piece of fur, but she's trying to rub it back to life. It's sort of play-like. It's sort of almost childlike in some ways, even though she's older. It seems like sometimes you might have heard the older we get, the closer back to being a child we sort of act sometimes, especially if you're getting 60, 70, 80 years old, because you realize that the dusk of your life is slowly, for some people, but quickly approaching. And you sort of result back to things that you loved doing when you were younger, when you were in your 30s or in your 20s or in your teens, or when you were a single digit. It sort of happens. You may see this with your grandparents at some point. They start to be more kid-like or childlike in nature, and it's not like they're reversing their maturity. It's just as we get older, that's what we do. I mean, we've already sort of feel comfortable in our own skin. We've already accomplished everything that we needed to accomplish. So sometimes we resort back to the times that made us feel better. And a lot of times that's back into our childhood and our teenage years. It may not seem that way while we're going through it, but as we live through our various periods of life, our 20s, our 30s, our 60s, and you get to the point where you're in your 80s and your kids have sort of all grown up and flew out the nest, right? A lot of your family and your friends could have moved on, could have passed. Maybe you're not friends with them anymore, whatever the case may be. You start to really look at life differently than you did when you were, say, 18. So in this sense, going back to the symbolism, this fur represents Miss Brill. She is putting some excitement back into her life and starting her day off positively, right? She's trying to be a positive person, or is a positive person. She doesn't want to have any of that negative light shine in on her or around her, which we do see eventually with that young couple, the way that they kind of treat her. After which, she heads to the garden. She takes in everything around her, notices little things, seemingly insignificant details. She enjoys this aspect of her Sundays, and she tends to create stories in her head about everyone that passes her. So again, right there, you can kind of tell of, the theme of being rejected, of being lonely. Every Sunday, she sort of has the same routine where she walks around her area and she just takes life in, right? Every little major or minor detail she takes in, good or bad. She tries to make a positive spin out of that. And then she uses her imagination. Because again, if you're that alienated from folks, or if you don't have people that come and visit you, you have to sort of have a active imagination to sort of stay sane. Because otherwise you will be depressed. You will have that negative thought of, who knows what. So she's trying to keep active, her mind active, her imagination active. So she's making little short stories to some degree in her head as she does her Sunday walks through the gardens, through the parks. So thus, we see how Miss Brill creates this ideal environment around her by distorting what is actually surrounding her. It can be argued that this mindset is a result of a woman's loneliness and as seen later in the story, her sense of rejection. So she has to keep her mind active. She has to keep that psyche of her going. Because otherwise, I mean, again, you're going to invite negative thoughts, that negative light to shine around you. And, you know, at her age, with nobody coming to visit her or whatever the case may be, that could be deadly in a lot of ways. You know, you have to stay active. You have to stay, you know, keen to your surroundings. And even if you have to sort of change things around to make it sort of fit what you're trying to create in your mind, that happy place, I guess, is what she's trying to get to. Some additional thoughts on theme. Miss Brill mentions how she does not converse with the individuals at the park on Sunday, so she's more or less she eavesdrops in. She's more of a spectator or observer to the things that are going on, because she simply listens to their conversation. This suggests that she's not a very social person, that she tends to keep her thoughts inside, which she does if she's making up these little, you know, Sunday short stories in her head, so to speak. Also, the fact that she is called Miss Brill suggests that she is not married and perhaps never was. So that's another aspect we can kind of look miss, right? MISS instead of MRS. We don't really know if she was married or wasn't married at some point. We don't know if she's widowed. That's something that's sort of, you can kind of leave up for your own interpretation. But that could, as it relates to building up her characterization, that could, you know, shine some light on who Miss Brill is overall. Because if she was never married, she never experienced maybe the true love that that young couple was sort of experiencing early on. Obviously, she can't enjoy raising kids. So when she sees the, you know, the younger kids and stuff playing while she's doing her Sunday, you know, trek through the park, she won't necessarily know what motherhood or being a parent is all about. But then again, you know, maybe she was married and her husband left or divorced or died, and that would sort of make her a widow. And she may have, you know, some of those experiences in her life. Again, it's a really good point to pull out. Why did Mansfield leave her as a Miss, MISS, and not Miss, you know, a Mrs. and not a, you know, Miss, MRS? So that's something maybe when you're thinking about that particular essay topic, maybe you can kind of bring some of that in there if you decide to write on Miss Brill here. Therefore, one person can assume that she is reserved and rather lonely person, which, you know, going through this piece of fiction, we sort of realize that. Only feeding off of other conversations and relationships from action in her own life. Due to Miss Brill's loneliness, she has a tendency to create a fake and more exciting world, which, you know, anytime that we daydream, we're all guilty of it. We think of something that will make our world better. That's basically what she's doing to sort of keep her mind active. She's thinking of the positive, a better world for herself and her surroundings, all the while ignoring the truth and that lurks around her. So the truth is, she is a lonely, isolated person that doesn't seem to have a lot of either family or friends in her life. Because if she's having to take these Sunday strolls to the garden and to the park and sort of basically eavesdrop on other conversations and observe what's going around to create a better sort of, you know, world view for herself in her own imagination, then there's something really kind of going on a little bit more deeper with her. In the end, the ignorance leads to brutal awakening when Miss Brill is insulted by a man for which she had only minutes earlier created a false, much more kind personality. So her imagination sort of comes shattered, right? Because she's giving this person a happier characterization, but in real life, he's not this happy-go-lucky person. In this instance, one can see how Miss Brill's loneliness and misconception of reality, right? Her reality that is outside of her in comparison to the reality that she creates in her own head is really different, has led to a harsh dose of reality for her, ultimately leading to the woman's sense of rejection. So now she feels rejected by the world. One can assume that this is not the first time Miss Brill has encountered rejection, which has led to her reserved personality. Ultimately, Miss Brill's thoughts and behaviors throughout the story demonstrate how loneliness can lead to a misconception of reality and therefore a sense of rejection. So that's a really big theme in this particular short story that you can kind of, expand on and write about as you think about your first paper topic. If you wanted to write on Miss Brill and that particular topic that I have on that assignment sheet, you can kind of, blend some of this stuff in. And again, we'll look at some of those topics here before we move on this. The message. The ultimate message really of this story is what? Well, from this story, one can conclude that our perception of reality can often be misjudged due to personal circumstances, which it can, right? In addition, one can learn from this story the harsh reality that society is not as forgiving and caring as we all desire it to be. So again, yeah, Miss Brill was trying to desire a much more compassion, empathetic society in her reality that she was creating, imagine narratively in her head. But the real reality is that the world is harsh. Society is harsh. The reality around us on a day-to-day basis is a harsh reality. It's not always peaches and cream and rainbows and all that stuff. Life is tough. Society is tough. Everybody that we meet on a day-to-day basis are always not that friendly either. There are many Miss Brill in this world, and while they must learn to reach out and see reality, the people on the outside must appreciate that they do not know everyone's story and background. Those individuals must learn to be accepting of others regardless of their circumstances, which I believe that is true. The true message of the story is that our own inner selves are our toughest battle, as we're sort of battling each other. There's that conflict every time that we step foot out of the house. We kind of have that self, perception. Am I going to be liked? Who's going to hate me today? Who's going to, mock me today? Who's going to make fun of me today? Who's going to pull me up today? Who's going to be my support? So we have a lot of those mixed messages sometimes. And it's very easy to get your reality that's going on in your head, that you're sort of making this stuff happen in your brain to sort of, hey, well, it's going to be true. I want to step out and nobody's going to really like me, or everybody's going to sort of, they're going to make fun, like in Miss Brill's case, they're going to make fun of the way I look or the way I, wear fur or this or that. And they don't really even know what's going on in your life. They haven't been in your skin. They haven't walked in your shoes. But it's easier to tear somebody down when your life is going great, but you don't really understand because this person's a stranger. They look different. They're odd. It's just easier to, pick at them and tear them down than it is to really get to understand them, because you may be able to learn some lifelong lessons from them, because they might have experienced some stuff that you would hope never in your lifetime experience. But you don't know that until you get to know somebody. And tearing them down is just going to make it worse on their end, and it's really going to make you look like a jerk. So it's always good to be kind to everybody as much as you can. Try to walk a mile for a couple minutes in their shoe to see what's going on. If we are not comfortable with ourselves, again, this means being comfortable in your own skin, we can't be comfortable with our surroundings. This will therefore ultimately lead to an inability to differentiate perception and reality, forcing one to learn the hard way that what true reality is. So some of the style that Mansfield uses here is personification. You've probably heard this word before, maybe in a poetry class. Uses personification, Mansfield does several times throughout the story. For example, when Miss Brill is taking out her fur, she rubbed the life back into the dim little eyes, speaking of the fur as though it were alive, right? It's a dead item, but she's trying to put life back into it. The author does this to demonstrate how Miss Brill is lonely and has no human beings to talk to, and therefore turns to inanimate objects. Mansfield uses personification to further elaborate Miss Brill's character. In addition, this use of personification is also somewhat of a representation of Miss Brill herself. For example, when Miss Brill puts on the fur, it is as though she is adding light back into her own life. Similarity to how she awakened the fur, this use of personification helps to better understand Miss Brill's character. So yeah, she has a lot of stock or investment in her inanimate objects. By rubbing life back into this dead animal, this dead fur, she thinks she's bringing that positively back to life. By putting that fur on, she's thinking about rubbing, her life back in order, making her life a lot lively and active again. So that's again a good term to sort of kind of keep in mind as you look at some of the other pieces of short fiction, because a lot of these stories use you can apply a lot of these literary devices and terms too. Another example of personification is at the end of the story when Miss Brill is putting away the fur. She thought she heard something crying, right, like a baby animal or something. Suggestion that the fur itself was crying. This is another situation where Mansfield uses personification to represent Miss Brill. As Miss Brill makes the comment about hearing something cry, this is actually a way of demonstrating how Miss Brill feels, right? She's having feelings toward these inanimate objects as well, but also how she feels deep inside. After having been insulted by the man in the park, right, Miss Brill feels hurt and rejected as though something inside her is crying as well. So she puts sort of a connection to the fur as well as the connection that's going to her own harsh reality. When she puts the fur away, she's having to sort of put herself away. She has to go back home and put it away, right? She has to stop walking in the park to stop the hurting. Mansfield uses use of personification in this instant only helps to further the reader's understanding of Miss Brill herself. So yeah, she's a lonely, she's isolated, she Brill, you can kind of maybe frail, right? You can kind of change that up a little bit and do a little word association. Maybe she is a frail older woman whose outside skin is not really as hardened or calloused as the harsh reality of her real world. She's still trying to find herself a way in the world, even though she's lived this long life. She's still having a hard time accepting reality for what it is. She doesn't want to see the ugliness and everything, but she's trying to block that out. That's why she sort of creates her own little stories and changes the personality of people in these stories, because in some ways she doesn't like to face that conflict of the person snapping at her or the person making an ugly or a rude remark, which, I mean, again, going back to our own reality of things, that's daily life. I mean, you're not going to please everybody in the world as long as you live. There's always going to be somebody that's going to doubt you or hate you, and they don't even know you. But, they mention your name or see your picture, they don't like you already. And you didn't even do anything to them. So in a lot of ways, that's sort of how some of this rejection, some of this harsh reality of Miss Brill, she just sort of walks to the park and sits down at the bench and just listens, minding her own business, creating all these own little stories in her own head. But then she's got other people that walk by and look at her, nose is up or nose is down. They have their own perception of her. And it throws her through a really whirlwind of emotions, to the point where she feels like when she's putting that fur away, it's sort of like killing the animal again, because it can't come out and play, or it can't be on her anymore. So when she puts it away, in a sense, when she goes back to her house, she's putting herself away. Now you can kind of look at that in a couple of different scenarios. Is she putting herself away in her house as a way, as sort of like a metaphorical living coffin, because she's putting herself away too, and she's sort of crying for that sense as well, because now she's like, well, the Sunday afternoon in the park has been a really bad experience. Do I want to sort of put myself through that again next Sunday? So in some ways, it's her removing herself from that harsh reality. But when she does so, she's removing herself from the reality that is life at that moment. Even though she's still living and breathing, she's just taking herself out of that particular environment. But again, it looks like when she's closing, uh, the drawer or the closet on the fur, when she shuts the door of her house and her inside of it, it's like shutting that coffin on her. Um, Very interesting. Simile. It's another literary device you probably heard, especially when you're dealing with poetry. A lot of these are interchangeable. So when we get into the poetry section in October and the drama section in November, hopefully you've learned enough of these, because you can use those in poetry. You can use them in novels, novellas, short stories, essays, plays. All this can sort of come back and apply to those particular literary genres. The simile, the story contains many examples of similes used to give a better understanding of how Miss Bliss or Miss Brill feels about certain people and situations. When Miss Brill is noticing the different people at the park, she compares them and their situations on many different things. For example, when noticing that there are many old people in the park, she says they look as though they just come from dark little rooms or even cupboards, comparing them to dark, grim individuals. Similarity: when pondering the elderly couple sitting next to her, she states that they sit on the bench still as statues. The use of similes in Mansfield's story helps readers to comprehend Miss Brill's thoughts and emotions toward others. So again, coming from dark little rooms, dark, grim individuals. So she already sees sort of the negative light that's sort of shining off of these folks. She's wanting to, again, use her imagination to take a positive light or positive spin on these folks. And again, the sort of the classic one, set on the bench still as statues, like as if they were just inanimate objects or just simply dead, because they're not moving. You can't see them breathing. You can't see the air coming in and out of their lungs. So she's trying to, again, when she's doing her own thinking and daydreaming, she's trying to create life for a lot of these people that looks different in her own mind compared to what her reality is showing her at the moment. Symbolism. Mansfield uses a few examples of symbolism throughout her story. Miss Brill, for one, the orchestra and the songs they play are symbolic of Miss Brill's feelings throughout her time at the park. So again, they have that orchestra and that music that sort of fills the air. When Miss Brill sees and senses happy individuals in the park, she says that the band played more quickly, more organically than ever. So there's sort of a relation there. This helps to demonstrate Miss Brill's inner thoughts. Symbolism shown in the story is very helpful in representing Miss Brill on a deeper, more emotional level. So yeah, I mean, if you go back and look at this section of where the music is playing, there seems to be more happy individuals that are enjoying life. They have a positive aura about them compared to the ones that are dim, who are like statues, who are rude, who are nasty, who are just, their personality or just it's just ugly. The music starts to slow down or just pretty much disappear at that point. Point of view. Point of view is really good when you're dealing with any kind of literary fiction or nonfiction. Mansfield's story is written in a third person limited omnipotent point of view. The point of view allows readers into Miss Brill's mind. again, because we're able to see what she's trying to create using her own imagination of what she sees around her, was the right choice in the order to convey Mansfield's overall message of this story. If readers were not able to know Miss Brill's thoughts and feelings and to hear and see what she hears and sees, the same aspect could not be conveyed, which is true, because if we can't get in her head, we won't know what type of stuff that she is really observing as the main observer throughout this walk, or the imaginative stories she's trying to create on people or give people. For example, by only knowing Miss Brill's thoughts, the author, in this case, again, Mansfield, was able to create this fake world in Miss Brill's eyes, which ultimately led to an in-depth understanding of her loneliness and inability to differentiate perception and reality for this story. This choice of point of view was imperative. So Mansfield had to write Miss Brill in this particular point of view, because if we don't know what's going on in Miss Brill's head, we would have a different outlook of what the message needed to be, and our own interpretation of this story would be totally different from what it is as we read from beginning, middle, and end. The setting, physical setting of Miss Brill is in France during the 1920s. Again, this is sort of toward at the tail end of World War I. The story takes place in a popular park with a band that plays every Sunday. The emotional setting of the story is set around loneliness and judgment. So good. Another aspect of the theme there you can kind of look at is judgment. In some ways, she's judging her environment. She's judging those folks that are around her. But the harsh reality is that they are also judging her. She may be judging them in a way that, hey, this person is dim, is dark, is statue-like, they're happy, but she, in her own head, is trying to give them a better life, because she's trying to create something that is more of a positive setting for them. But in reality, their demeanor is their demeanor. If they're ornery or hateful, that's their personality. That's the harsh reality that we face, not just in the 1920s with Miss Brill, but now, 2022. We still have folks that like to judge us. We are guilty of judging folks as well. So, I mean, that is sort of a double-edged sword there. So even though this was set in the 20s during a time of war, a lot of the same themes linger on to the 21st century. All right. Hopefully that was a good representation of Miss Brill. Let's see what my time is here, because I don't want these to go too terribly long. I may have to do a couple of them. Well, we may have a little bit of time to do Spunk. We will try that. So about Zora Neale Hurston, right? She was born in 1891 and lived to 1960. She was raised in poverty from a rural town in Florida called Eatonville. Eatonville was discovered primarily by African Americans. She was highly active within the jazz era, Roaring Twenties. So if you remember any of your history courses, you probably talked about that particular jazz age and Roaring Twenties. Throughout her stories, she reveals the time period of her growing up. Her publications were hardly recognized, but after she passed, they were rediscovered. So she's one of the ones that wasn't as popular or famous while living and while writing, which a lot of artists have that. It was really only after death, after getting rediscovered, that her popularity really rose. I mean, one way that you can kind of look at this is think of Michael Jackson. He was really popular in the 70s and 80s. His popularity started to go downhill probably in the mid 90s after those child abuse cases started to come out. But after he died, everybody went out and tried to buy everything that was related to Michael Jackson. So it really, raised his stock a little bit. That was sort of what happened to Hurston here. She was somewhat known, not, probably not as popular, obviously, as Jackson was during her time, but once she was rediscovered and after she died, that's when she really got sort of famous. Summary of Spunk, right, takes place in 1927 and begins with Lena and Spunk. They walk through the town into the woods together. Joe and Lena's husband walk into a general store. Interesting fact about this particular short story, Spunk was entered into a National Urban League magazine literary contest and actually won the second prize. Elements of fiction. The setting, this takes place in a rural African-American southern town around 1920. Again, notice too, Miss Brill happened around 1920. Again, after really the tail end of the First World War, as this particular story is happening in a southern town, this being in the States. But again, the same thing going on. I mean, when you talk about World War I, it was global. So the difference between, being in Florida and being in France. Yes, there's oceans apart, there's miles apart, but they're still coming off this conflict of this major world war that everybody was sort of a part of at some point. Point of view. The point of view used in this story is third person limited. So notice this one's limited compared to Miss Brill. Miss Brill is third person, but it's omnipotent. This one is third person limited. And it's because we cannot read the thoughts of the characters. So the difference there is within Miss Brill's story, we can read her thoughts. In this particular story by Hurston makes it where we can't read the characters' thoughts. We don't really know what's going on in their mind. Characters. You have Spunk, who's a round, again, thinking about literary devices and terms here. He's a round, dynamic. He's the protagonist. Main character. He's able to convince Lena to leave her husband and be with him. He enjoys dangerous jobs, carries a gun on him, is a bit feared by the townspeople. So in some ways, he's sort of like the big bully. He's able to manipulate folks to get what he wants. He's able to, I guess, raise the voice to a certain level that sort of fears people because, I mean, he does the dangerous jobs. He does carry a gun, kind of a loose cannon. Don't know where he's coming from on certain issues. So you kind of tiptoe around what you say to him because you just don't know how he's going to respond or react to your behavior, right? Lena is a flat, static character. She's the antagonist. She does cheat on Joe with Spunk. Joe is a flat, static protagonist described as a coward. He murdered by Spunk, and he is Lena's husband. So there you go. There's a conflict right there. Elijah and Walter, they are comical, add comic relief to the story, and they are also instigators. So as you can tell with some of these elements of fiction through some of these stories, you're going to have minor characters or you're going to have characters that do add comical relief because otherwise the story is either going to just be too depressing or too involved that you wish that you'd have something in there to sort of break up the tension. And that's where these characters of Walter and Elijah come in. They sort of ease the tension there by giving you comical relief where it's needed. The plot, couple at the moment are happy. Walks through a village going into the woods away from a small crowd at a general store who are gossiping about the couple. We see in the rising action, Joe has convinced himself to get his wife back by killing Spunk. The climax, which is the turning point of this particular short story, Joe has enough spunk, has had enough of Spunk, attempts to kill Spunk, but fails, and Spunk shoots him. So again, Spunk being a dangerous character, carries that gun. He was able to defend himself, I guess, in the attack. Later on, Spunk believes the ghost of Joe is hunting him and is then killed by falling over a saw, deeply stabbing him to death, which is a really gruesome. Both of them are pretty gruesome. I mean, anytime that you know, violence is involved when it deals with a relationship, in this case, a husband and a wife, and a third party. Shooting is bad enough, but getting, chopped up by a saw, it's got to be a gruesome sight to experience, to see, to be the person that did get sort of chopped up. I mean, it's nasty all the way around, right? As we get to the following action of this short story, we see that Lena grieves the death of Spunk and holds a funeral for him. Members of the crowd from the general store talk amongst each other about whether Joe was braver than Spunk. Again, going back to that whole supernatural element that Hurston is actually putting in there, this ghost, right? The ghost of Joe. That's where they're sort of getting at, because ultimately, we just revealed that Joe wasn't all that brave. It seemed while he was alive, but after death, he seemed to maybe have that supernatural ability to do that. At least that was what was in Spunk's mind. He was thinking he was getting chased or haunted by the ghost of Joe. The ending, the resolution, life goes back to normal after the funeral, which you lost basically a lover and a husband. I don't know how life could really get back to 100% normal after experiencing both of those situations in a short amount of time. But again, this is fiction, so you have to have a suspension of disbelief, maybe. So let's see. Conflicts. You got to think about some of these conflicts that happen not only in Miss Brill, but also in Spunk. You have the external conflict, Spunk and Lena versus Joe and crowd at general store. Man versus man, Spunk versus Joe. Man versus circumstances, Spunk versus ghost of Joe. So these are all good ideas that you can sort of, build upon your first paper if you wanted to. If you want to talk a little bit more in detail about some of these conflicts. Theme, you have power and masculinity, Spunk and Joe willing to fight over their love of Lena. Spunk, the bigger and stronger character, forced to fight Joe. The weaker man knows the outcome in order to show his sense of power. You have love and passion, bravery. Joe expresses his love for Lena by fighting Spunk, but failing. Spunk gives his love to Lena by marrying her. Some quotes here, right, that you might want to sort of kind of keep in mind. The thing that got Spunk so nerved up, he couldn't shoot, but Spunk said, "That ain't no bobcat nohow." He says it was Joe done snucked back from hell. "Well," said Spunk, "done give him what's yours, but when yours inside, don't forget yours mine on, let no other man get out his place with you." If you notice the language here, could be tricky in a lot of areas. It's a dialect. It's a form of African American dialect, especially where Hurston grew up in this part of Florida, that she's using sort of everyday lingo, everyday conversation that she had with not only her family and friends growing up in this area. She's putting that more into her fiction writing to give a sense of authentic human beings. Even though it's fictional, you still have the speech, and the dialect of the speech is real. If you read any of her other short stories or novels, she does the same thing with this particular Florida African American dialect. It can be difficult to sometimes process and read because we're not used to it. Some folks would say it's sort of like a form of ebonics. I mean, I guess you can make that claim or that stretch. It could be that first sort of stages of this. Again, we got to keep in mind of the years that she was living in Florida. But a lot of folks, kind of look at it as, am I reading Chaucer here? Am I reading Shakespeare? Because this doesn't look like English. It is English. It's just a different form of dialect that she grew up around in this particular community in Florida, that she influenced her to have a lot of her characters speak like she grew up and was raised around. So sometimes you actually have to sort of reread some of these exchanges, these dialogues between characters in her works, because as you can tell, sometimes it's hard to even read out loud. You have to go back and sort of go through and sort of take a little bit of time with it. Symbolism, the Bobcat represents Joe in the supernatural world. Again, Spunk thinks he's coming back from the grave to revenge his killing. We have some tensions here. We have realism versus dreams. So again, this is a really good fit. Going back to the Mansfield piece, realism or reality versus the dreams or the daydreams or the stories that Miss Brill is imagining, creating in her head. Lena believes that by marrying Spunk, she'll live a materialistic life, have everything she ever wanted, which of course that comes out to be not really true or good for her, because she's lost both men in her life. So essentially now she's widowed, and she may not have, a way forward to have all the things she ever wanted in life at this point. Because people in the community also see her for what she is too. She was married. She had this man Spunk sort of convince her to leave the husband. He winds up killing her husband. She marries the guy that killed her husband, and then eventually, we interpret, or at least Spunk interprets, that the dead husband comes back from the grave to kill the person that took his only love away from him. So she's really, and the harsh reality is she's widowed with nothing to show for it. She doesn't have a husband. She doesn't really have any income coming in. So she's not as rich in life as she would hope to be. So she can go back dreaming, I guess. But the harsh reality is she's lonely, right? Like Miss Brill, and she's poor. She doesn't have everything that she thought that Spunk was going to be able to provide her. All right, so click this out. Those were the two stories in a nutshell. So let's look a little bit about Blackboard, just to give everybody sort of a sense about where we're at. So when you're logged into Blackboard, you should realize that your Blackboard page is going to look like this. It's going to show what classes you are taking. On my end, it's going to show the courses that I'm teaching. So I'm looking at 1102. Notice, again, if you read that email I sent out last Thursday, I kind of tell you where you can find your syllabus and your textbook, but I briefly run over these real quick in case somebody didn't get that email, or if it's just easier to see virtually. If you click here, there's your syllabus. You can download and read the syllabus. Again, read through that. It's going to be up here until the end of the semester. The checklist, I'm going to pull this up because that's going to be really one of the more important things that you want to sort of kind of keep close by. Again, this is going to be up until the end of the semester. But for the most part, this tells you what week we're on, in this case, week 1. E-text is the OER textbook. I'll show you where that's at. These are the page numbers to read in there. And then I tell you to read these short stories, which you will find in the Blackboard folder. And then I give you what assignment is due for that week. And as you can tell, it looks like most things are going to be due on Sunday. But if you look down here when we get to week 5, which again would be later into the, toward the end of September, exam 1, which would be based on fiction, pretty much everything that we've read since week 1 is fair game on exam 1. Again, as it gets closer, I will give you a little bit more of a overview of how that's going to be set up for the exam, what you need to study for, how to go about studying it. That's going to be due on Wednesday, the 21st of September. And then essay 1 or paper 1, which is based on your fiction that you've also read since the beginning of the semester. That's going to be due that Sunday on the 25th. So just basically kind of keep in mind of when these deadlines are. There's some deadlines that are due on a Monday. There's some that are due on a Thursday. But for the most part, things are sort of due on Sunday. But just keep this up so you can kind of keep in mind what is due and what you need to do as far as the reading. When we get to the final exam, which the college really only offers 2 days for the final exam, because this is strictly 100% online course, you're going to have to do a ProctorU final exam. There's information in your syllabus that talks a little bit about that. You have to create a username and a password. You want to make sure that you have a working mic and camera. But as we get closer to that, and it looks like yours is going to be due on the 12th of December, but as we get closer to December, I will give you some handouts and talk a little bit more about that so you can go ahead and prepare for it. There's also some information, pretty much the same information that I'm going to pass out or hand out or send out really on ProctorU is down here. So you can kind of go ahead and read through some of this stuff as it gets closer. Online tutoring, you have this thing called Smart Thinking. It's 24/7. It's free. If you have a paper, right, you want to go ahead and start rough drafting essay 1, you can send me and Smart Thinking a draft so we can kind of give you some feedback before it's due so you can get a better grade. Just walk through this and go through the instructions. It's generally pretty straightforward. Generally, if they're not really busy, because they cater to other colleges too, like if it gets closer to midterm or a final, or when things are usually due for most people, then there might be a wait time. But usually you can kind of get your essay back within a 24-hour time frame. I've had folks get it back within 4 to 6 hours. So it all just depends on who they have working and what's going on their end. But this is a good way to get feedback on your paper before you turn it in for a final grade. So I would definitely utilize that because it is free. So going back here, our textbook is basically right here. You click on it and it's going to take you there. So you don't really have to buy anything in this class. What you may want to buy is a thumb drive or a flash drive so you can save your essays on. Maybe you want to copy and paste some of the stuff from the weekly folder in a Microsoft Word document so you can save that for future references. But this is the particular textbook. The pages go with the pages that are on the table of contents here, not necessarily the pages here. So when I give you the page number online or in your syllabus or on that checklist, I'm referring to the ones on the table of contents, not the page number up here. Now, are we going to read all 1,100 or 1,200 pages of this textbook? No. We're going to be selective in what we use. A lot of the stuff, as you can tell, going back to where you will find your assignments, which is in the lesson folder, the weekly Blackboard folder. I kind of give you an overview of what you need to do to be successful for the week. Once you read the stuff in the textbook, if you're still having some issues, that's where these videos would kind of come in and be supplemental material. So read the stuff in the textbook. If you're still unsure, then go back to these videos and sort of watch them. Now, some of them, like I said, week to week, some may be lengthy, some may be short. You want to kind of pick your battles with that, depending on how much time. Again, it comes back to organization and time management on your part. Generally, you have a 7-day window to get all this, stuff done, unless it's like a a major paper where you're going to have weeks to sort of develop that. But as it relates to weekly reading, you have 7 days to get the weekly reading done. So if you take a little bit each time or each day, devote some time to this class, by the time it gets to Sunday, you're not rushing to try to watch, a 24-minute video here or a 25-minute video there on top of reading the short stories that I have uploaded. You click on it, it's going to take you to the hyperlink, which the short stories are going to vary from week to week. Some of them may only be 2 pages, some of them may be 45 pages. So just sort of keep that in mind. If you're not a fast reader, then you need to sort of split it up. And what I used to do, because when I was going for my master's degree, we had to read like 700 and 800 page novels basically in almost a 7-day period too. It was hectic, and sometimes it was right down cruel and hellish a lot of ways. But you had to do what you had to do to get that degree, right? So what I suggest folks to do, if reading is just not your cup of tea, is what I did. And I like to read, but when you have 800 pages, you got to read in a 7-day period, and then hope you don't have a pop quiz coming in on it the next time you meet. I mean, you kind of have to try to be creative, because a lot of times you can't find, and I know they're out there, right? Spark notes, Cliff notes. A lot of the stuff that I was reading in grade school, nobody has written a Spark note or Cliff note on. So I was basically on my own to read it and interpret it to the best of my ability. So let's say, just argument's sake, let's say that for this week, Miss Brill is roughly about 4 pages there, and I think Spunk is about 6. And then you got these pages up here, right? Now, keep in mind, sometimes these things in our page numbers in our textbooks, they have pictures, they have other things with it. So sometimes those pictures take up a good bit of room. But let's just say 1 through 4, that's about 4 pages. 51 through 58, that's about 7. So we're looking at 7 plus 4 plus 10 with the other. So let's say this week you have 21 pages to read, right? Reading's not your cup of tea. So you know that you have X amount of days. So if you started your reading, let's say Monday, you basically have 6 days left. So I would divide the total number of pages that you have by 6. And that would basically give me a rough estimate of how many pages a day I need to read to sort of get everything read and done by Sunday. So 3.5, I would probably round that up to 4. So if you're doing 4 pages Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you get the sort of the gist of that. So if you did 4 pages a day starting on Monday, 4 times 3, because today's Wednesday, it's 12. So if you look now, 21 minus 12, you only have 9. So you can recalculate that if you need to. If you start counting right Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, divide that by 4, it's still probably going to be 3.5. Well, that's a little less. So that's probably what I would do if you're not a really big reader. And if time is sort of an essence, especially if you work, if you're at dual enrollment with high school, you get other things going on. But really, to be successful, to be able to do well on the essays that come up later in the semester, to do well on the exams, on the weekly things that are due every Sunday, you have to make the effort to read. Cliff notes and Spark notes, that helps to some degree, but just reading them alone is not necessarily going to guarantee you a good grade on a paper or an essay or, an exam. So you have to do the reading. However, you have to get it done. You need to, make the effort to get it done. Procrastination won't be your friend here. If you're a procrastinator, you're going to start hating life really fast, really soon, or at least you're going to start hating this course. And I hate that feeling for you. But online courses are not as easy as they seem. There is a lot of work. That's why I say you have a 7-day window to get most of this weekly stuff done. So if you wait until Sunday at 6 o'clock in the evening to get everything that you need to get done in this class when you had 6 days prior, then that's really on you, not on me, because you had the opportunity to start earlier, to do a little bit each day. You don't have to devote your whole life to it. But, like I said, I just showed you an easy way how to split up the reading. Take an hour each day to make sure that you're caught up. until you get to a point where you're on a regular schedule. You may not need an hour each day. As you start moving along, you might be able to knock it out a little bit sooner, but you're not going to know what you need and what you don't need if you procrastinate and wait, because you definitely are going to be stressing, rushing. The quality of your work is going to show up, because I know when somebody's really been focusing on something compared to somebody that's just went to Wikipedia, went to a couple YouTube videos, and threw something together in about 2 hours before it was due. I mean, it shows. I've been doing this long enough to know what good quality work looks like and what not so good quality work, because I've been published too. I published creative pieces, short stories. I published, scholarly articles. So I know the time, the effort that usually goes into this stuff. I've been doing this for nearly 20 years. At some level, whether it's university level, college, community college, technical, Job Corps, high school, tutoring wise, I've been there, done that. I've been a student. I know how students usually think, because I've also been the one that sometimes waited the last minute and had to kind of rush to put something together and didn't do so well too. But then again, I've also been rushed and did really well. So it all depends on the subject, I guess. Here's the topic. This is the quiz. The quiz covers basically these two readings. So again, Spunk and Miss Brill. There's 10 questions. You do have 30 minutes. There is a time limit. So once you hit begin, the time limit's going to start. When 30 minutes happens, if you didn't save your answers or didn't save anything, it's just going to submit a blank piece of, a blank quiz, which is automatically going to grade as a 0. So again, going back to the whole deal with zeros, be careful with zeros. That's why you want to follow deadlines and instructions. You get 3 zeros in this class, you're already at a 40. Because each 0 is basically 20 points off of your grade. You get 2 zeros, you're at a 60. You get 5 or more zeros, you're basically stuck at a 0. You have to nearly get 15 100s or more on the remaining assignments just to pull. Let's say you had the 4 or the 3 zeros. You need to get 15 100s to pull that 40 just up to a 70. The thing is, we don't have necessarily 15 assignments for you to do that. And chances are you're probably not going to ace 15 things if you're not acing things now. So just be wary about zeros. Zeros will hurt. They will drop your grade quickly. I've seen folks go from a 95 to a 55 in 3 weeks. This is one of those things, if you're a procrastinator, if you can't manage your time, you've got a lot of social activity stuff going on outside of this particular class and your other classes, then you might want to rethink about taking this class at another time when you have more time to focus, or take it as an in-person if you're more of an in-person learner compared to an online learner, because this goes by fast. We go from week 1 to week 2. We don't backtrack. We don't make up stuff. That's why I say late work is not going to be acceptable. If it's late, just know that you're going to get a 0 and we're moving on. Just do better next time, and hopefully you don't get 2 more zeros, because if you get 2 zeros, you're pretty much, you go from whatever chance of making that A to now you've got a low D. And 1 more 0 is going to fail you. The questions are really straightforward. There's 5 questions on Spunk and there's 5 questions on Miss Brill. If you read the stories, if you've taken your notes, if you read some of and I know people do it, and I suggest that you do read Spark Notes and Cliff Notes, especially one if you're having difficulty understanding certain areas of the story. But I would read the story first and then use those study guides as supplementary material. I wouldn't read the study guide stuff first and then try to read the story. And then again, I wouldn't necessarily just read the Spark Notes without reading. Because you may or may not do as well in that quiz. You may or may not do well in that essay just going by Spark Notes alone. I will tell you this, most folks that, sort of done that and confess and say, well, the first 3 weeks of class, I just read Spark Notes. Why is my grade a 72? Well, it's probably because you just confessed to me that you just read Spark Notes. You're not getting the full advantage by just reading that. I mean, you got to read the text. And a lot of it was that they were procrastinating. They waited until Sunday to do stuff too, so it didn't help them out. I did send everybody a visual aid about how I want you to set up your essays for this class. We're using MLA 9, so check your email for that. I sent that out yesterday. It basically shows you how to go about setting up the paper, right? You need to have Times New Roman, double space, font size needs to be 12. I can show you probably momentarily how to find that in Microsoft Word, how you can get a sort of a free template. But let me download this first fiction paper topics, talk a little bit about that. And I know this video is moving along a little bit longer than what I expected, but it's the first week, so I wanted to sort of give everybody who's sort of new to the online experience a chance to see everything that I need to sort of show you here. So just bear with that. And again, you can kind of break this video up, you know, watch a little bit here, watch a little bit there too if you need to. All right, so as you can tell, fiction essay, this is the fiction essay topics. There's 6 topics because we're basically reading within the next 5 weeks or 4 weeks. We're doing 6 particular short pieces of fiction. As you can tell, topics 1 and 2 deal with week 1 readings. It deals with Spunk, deals with Miss Brill. Topics 3 and 4 is going to deal with week 2 readings, which is coming up next week. And then the last 2 deal with Steinbeck's novella, which that one is kind of lengthy. So you probably want to try to jump on that. I think it's about 6 chapters. It's nearly 100 pages or so. But I give you 2 particular essay topics to choose from there. So the guidelines are, again, MLA 9, double space, Times New Roman 12, 3 pages or 750 words. It's due by 11:59 on Sunday, September 25th. So you have nearly a month to work on this. Everybody now knows when this thing is due. So when the 25th gets here, there shouldn't be any excuse, oh, I can't get it in. You have a month. You have nearly 30 days starting today, 31 days really, to start working on this. Now, granted, if you want to wait until we start getting into the novella, which would be about week 3, I think that's still a good enough time that you should be able to come up with a really decent, well-written 3-page paper. Because there's no sense of you picking, let's say, topic 5 this week if you haven't even read the Pearl yet. See what I'm saying? The whole reason why I'm giving you these in advance, so as we go from week 1 to week 2, you can start, you know, brainstorming, thinking, hey, would I rather write on Mansfield because I really like that story a little bit better than I did the Pearl? That would give you a little bit of wiggle room. I mean, if you go ahead and pick, you know, let's say you like the Hurston story and you want to just, that's your topic, then that's great. Go ahead and start writing. If you want to wait until next week, until the end, after you read the next 2 stories, by that time you've read 4 stories, you can make a choice there. Just note, you know, if you don't read a story for 1 week, because it doesn't have anything to do with your paper, that's sort of fine, but keep in mind you do have an exam over these fiction pieces. So you don't want to get in a habit of, I'm just going to read the story that I'm going to write my paper on, and that's going to be it. I don't really care about the other things. I just sort of BS my way through it. Well, you can try that way, but it's going to come back and bite you because, again, every Sunday there's something due for that particular week's reading, and then when we get to the week that this paper is due, 4 or 5 days prior, you're going to have a fiction exam that's going to cover all 6 of these. So if you don't read, it's going to come back and haunt you here in about a month. Just let you know that now. Don't do that. I want everybody to be successful in this class. We do offer this class yearly. I don't really want you to start thinking about that if you have to retake it for any reason. I want folks to do well the first time so you can kind of move on. I don't think anybody signed up this class to fail it. At least I hope not, because that's a lot of money that somebody had to pay out. And you don't want to wreck your GPA, because if you got a scholarship or Hope or Pell, it may not kick in next semester if you fail too many classes. They're going to put you on an academic suspension or probation or something until you can pull your grades back up, which sometimes that takes some time. Going back to the format, if you have Microsoft Word, and you can use the free version in your Office 365 as well. But if you go here to, let's say, new document, notice there's a search bar for templates. You type in MLA, hit search, it's going to pull up 3. The first 2, you can pick either the MLA style research paper, or you can do the MLA style paper. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to do the first one. You click on it, you create it. You can read through this if you like. It basically tells you what MLA is and the whole deal with the format. It's a little bit behind times because we're on the 9th, not the 7th edition. But again, the material here is still pretty good. It shows you how, it basically tells you what you need to do, where you need to put stuff. So like in this case, your name, I'm just going to make up a student's name, Jeff Smith, my name. And this is how you would do every single essay in this class. Course number, you can do capital ENGL 1102. And the date, I would put the date that the actual paper is due. So for you, it's the 25th, so 9/25/22. You want to go up to last name and just make sure that you put your last name there. Leave the page number, because when you put the page number or your last name there, when we go to page 2, 3, and 4, your name's going to stay there and the page number is going to change, which is what you want. The next thing that you need to do is you want to highlight all this stuff because it's somebody else's work and you basically don't need it. We'll talk a little bit more about the works cited page and how to quote and that type stuff a little bit more maybe next week or during week 3, where most folks are going to be drafting. And you're going to have to use quotes from your particular story that you're using in your paper. If you had 1101, which most of you had, you've written a research paper, you should have. If you had high school, literature, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, you probably written a paper there where you had to use quotes from the actual novel or short story or a poem. So you have to use that stuff to support your arguments. We would give you sort of a refresher of that, but if you just had 1101, let's say last semester or in the spring, you should know how to do this by now. The title, you don't necessarily need a subtitle unless you want, but it does need a title. And a title is not just saying the thing is fiction and paper, or fiction essay, or essay 1, or paper 1, or don't give me something that's, just don't give me a blank title, because you don't go to a theater to watch a untitled movie. So think about, titles anywhere from like Family Guy to Star Wars. I mean, they're short, they're sweet. They don't have to be complete thoughts or sentences, but you need something there that's going to reflect the writing. So if we're going back to, I'm just going to sort of make up a title. Let's see, looking at our topics. Let's look at number 1. It says Hurston's Spunk, what is the relationship between the narrator and the village? So what you can say is, let's just say if I'm going to make a quick title on the fly, relationships between Hurston's, let's see how this is again. And again, this is just something I'm coming up on the fly here, so I would probably have to go back and do some modification. Hurston's narrator and you could say community or citizens, whatever the case may be, whatever is easiest at this point. But I'm just giving this as a suggestion. You need to have a title that reflects the writing to come. And then if you look, make sure that every time that you do a new paragraph, you tab it once. And then if you use this particular template that I found and erased everything that you needed to erase and put the stuff that you need to put on, if you notice, everything is still in the same format. It's still double spaced. If I highlight, which I can highlight on yours to see what your font is, it's still Times New Roman and it's still 12. I can tell whether you're doing double space or triple space, because a lot of folks will do this and they think we don't know the trick. Well, we know the trick because we've done it. They may do something like multiple. As you can tell, it looks like that. I can easily just highlight that and I can go up to the paragraph and I can tell whether you did multiple or not. You can do double and then they try to do, they try to expand this up a little bit. And it looks like, yeah, I can still do that too, right? So we know the little tricks of the trade, mainly because I've done it before when I was a college student trying to get more. And you usually do it because you're in a rush, or you usually do it because you just don't have anything really intelligent to say, but you need to get something down because you wasted your time for the last 29 days, and here it is, day 30, and it's due. The other thing is they will leave this sort of Times New Roman, but they will try to change the font here. They may just leave it Times New Roman, but they change it to 16, right? Or they keep it at 12 and may go to something that's going to give them a little bit of room, like Courier Nude. So I know the little tricks of the trade here. So don't sort of, cheapskate me on substance. I look at quality of writing over quantity of writing. How good is the writing? How well can you argue? That type deal. So don't give me a bunch of fluff. When I say 3 pages, I really mean 3 pages or 750 words. Now, does that mean if you get 3 pages and you answered what you needed to answer this particular essay topic, stop. There's no need to go to page 7. If you get the 3 pages and you got, 550 words, then you need to go ahead and go to page 4 to try to get the page length to 750 words. This is something that, 2 pages is probably not going to be enough. You're going to need to have at least 3 pages. And 8 pages is a little bit too much. So use common sense here. Kind of keep it within the perimeters of 3 pages or 750 words. Use the text, right? Whatever topic that you choose that relates to your short stories, again, you're going to have to quote from it. You're going to have to set up your quotes properly, introduce them properly, document them properly, not only parenthetically inside the actual essay, the body of the work, but also as a works-cited page. And again, as it gets closer to maybe next week or week 3, I will be sending out handouts and stuff to talk a little bit more about that. But for the most part, just keep up with the reading and ask questions. Now, the other thing I was going to tell you about the weekly folders is at midnight on each Wednesday, basically when you wake up Thursday, the week 2 folder is going to open up, which means you can work ahead if you want to. Just to give you sort of a preview of week 2, this is sort of what week 2 looks like. I give you the 2 readings. There is a discussion that's going to be due on the 4th of September at that point. For the most part, everything is up for the next week, but as these weeks start to open up early, sometimes I may have to add a little bit of stuff that I haven't had a chance to add yet. The week doesn't really start until midnight Sunday. So if you want to sort of keep with schedule, then you just, basically work Sunday to Sunday. If you want to get ahead, especially as it gets closer to that novella that we're going to be reading of Steinbeck's in week 3 and week 4, then you might want to go ahead and kind of work ahead if you can. With that said, the week that we're on at midnight that Sunday, the folder is going to be unavailable. So if you need to make notes of any of this stuff, if you need to download any of this stuff, like the paper instructions, you want to do it before Sunday midnight, because Monday it disappears, and I can't guarantee that I can retrieve it once it disappears. So that's why you have a 7-day period to get all this stuff done too. Now, again, the other thing, like I said, for those that logged in, you need to do this quiz. If you haven't logged in, you need to log in and do this quiz. Again, obviously, I know you're going to have to read these things, but if you don't turn this quiz in by this Sunday, 11:59, Monday, you're going to be dropped from the course because you're going to be marked as a no-show. So going to the grade center, it looks like most folks have logged in. There's one person, Jacob, who hasn't. But as you can tell, most folks have logged in the last few days, but they haven't did quiz 1 yet. So just hypothetically, let's say Austin, I'm just randomly, choosing your name here. That's fine that you logged in on the 22nd, but if I get to August 29th and there's not a quiz here for me to grade, then August 29th, which is next Monday or this coming Monday, you're getting marked as a no-show and the register is going to process you and drop you from this course. Same deal will happen if you're taking 2 or 3 other online classes that you didn't do that first week graded assignment. They're going to drop you from the course. So Monday, you're going to try to log in and you're not going to be able to log in and you're going to wonder why. Well, that's probably why. You've been marked as a no-show and you're no longer enrolled in the course. So if you don't want that to happen and then go through the headaches of trying to get reinstated and paying extra money to get reinstated, complete this week's assignment by its deadline. All right, I think that's enough for me. I think this is a well lengthy video. Like I said, you can kind of break it up. This video will probably be up until this Sunday. Next week's video may not be as long. Again, if you need help with anything, please reach out and email me. I can't read mine, so I'm assuming that if you are not emailing me or asking questions, you know what you're doing. And we're just going to move on as such. So I hope everybody has a great Wednesday, great rest of the week. Have a great weekend. And I look forward to working with everybody during week 2.